thin red glow slips across ancient stone, revealing carvings that have not felt living eyes for centuries. Dust hangs perfectly still in the cold air, disturbed only by the faint vibration of a lightsaber, igniting somewhere deeper within the chamber. The sound is gentle at first, almost like a distant choir holding a single note, then it settles into the unmistakable hum that every generation of the galaxy has learned to fear. The walls are covered with symbols older than the Galactic Republic itself, their edges worn smooth by time, yet still carrying the weight of forgotten belief. Somewhere beyond the reach of the crimson light, another corridor disappears into darkness, as though the temple itself refuses to reveal all its secrets at once. This is where our journey through the complete history of the Sith begins, not as a tale of endless battles, but as a quiet walk through 1,000 years of darkness, told slowly enough that you can let the story carry you toward sleep. If you've traveled through these stories before, quietly notice which night this is for you. If you're joining for the first time, simply call it Night 1 and settle in. You are not rushing anywhere tonight. Instead, you are stepping into one of the oldest mysteries in Star Wars canon, following a trail that stretches from the dawn of the Jedi to the fall of Darth Sidious, across worlds whose names survived long after the people who built them turned to dust. Before there were Imperial Star Destroyers above Coruscant, before the Clone Wars, before the Republic believed itself eternal, another conflict had already shaped the destiny of the galaxy. It began so long ago that even the Jedi remembered it only through fragments. Why does the greatest enemy of the Jedi begin not outside their order, but within it? That question has echoed across Star Wars history for thousands of years, and the answer begins long before anyone ever spoke the name Darth Vader. According to current canon reference material, the Jedi Order traces its earliest origins to the ocean world of Ahch-To, a lonely planet hidden beyond familiar hyperspace routes. There, the first Jedi temple stood overlooking restless seas, built from simple stone rather than shining towers. The island was not a fortress. It was a place of meditation, balance, and careful observation of the Force. Long before Coruscant became the political heart of civilization, long before countless Jedi walked polished temple halls, the Order learned to listen to the living Force among crashing waves and endless skies. The Force itself was never divided into two different energies. Canon consistently presents it as one living current flowing through every creature, every world, every star, while the light side and dark side describe different ways beings choose to interact with that current. The Jedi sought harmony, compassion, patience, and selflessness. The dark side offered something much faster. Anger answered immediately. Fear sharpened awareness. Hatred granted strength that seemed limitless for a moment, even while demanding a terrible price over time. This temptation was not discovered by monsters from another galaxy. It appeared inside people who already understood the Force better than almost anyone else. That uncomfortable truth remains one of the foundations of Star Wars because the first steps toward darkness were taken by those who had once dedicated themselves to the light. As the centuries passed, the Jedi expanded beyond Ahch-To, establishing temples and enclaves throughout the Republic. Eventually, Coruscant became the center of the Order, its towering temple standing above one of the oldest cities in the galaxy. Thousands of Jedi Knights served as peacekeepers rather than conquerors, traveling hyperspace lanes aboard Republic vessels instead of commanding armies. They mediated disputes between worlds, investigated disturbances in the Force, and protected citizens who would never even meet them. Their authority rested not on military strength, but on trust, carefully earned over generations. Yet even during these peaceful eras, the temptation of forbidden knowledge never disappeared. Every generation produced individuals who believed the Jedi Code imposed unnecessary limits upon what the Force could truly accomplish. Why were some Jedi willing to abandon everything they had sworn to protect? Canon never reduces the answer to simple ambition. The Force grants extraordinary perception, and those who wield it inevitably encounter grief, loss, injustice, and fear. A Jedi might watch an entire colony destroyed by pirates, fail to save a beloved friend, or foresee suffering that discipline alone could not prevent. The dark side whispered that there was another path, one where emotion became a weapon instead of a burden. It promised certainty where patience demanded doubt. It promised control where compassion required sacrifice. Many listeners naturally imagine the fall beginning with overwhelming evil, yet Star Wars repeatedly shows that darkness often begins with an entirely recognizable desire to protect, to prevent pain, or simply to refuse helplessness. The Jedi eventually reached a difficult conclusion. Certain practitioners of the Force had embraced the dark side so completely that reconciliation no longer seemed possible within the Order. Canon describes the existence of ancient schisms among the early Jedi, conflicts in which dark side followers separated themselves from those who remained loyal to the principles of balance and restraint. The precise details of those earliest divisions remain intentionally mysterious in current canon, leaving space where history has faded into legend. Older expanded universe stories, now classified as legends rather than canon, describe dramatic wars and specific leaders responsible for these exiles. Those stories remain beloved by many fans, but Lucasfilm's current canon leaves much of this distant age deliberately unexplained, allowing the silence itself to become part of the mystery. That silence invites an unsettling question. If the official record remembers so little what was important enough to survive thousands upon thousands of years, certain names endured while entire civilizations vanished. One of those names is Moraband, the bleak world that later generations would associate with the Sith. During the Clone Wars, Yoda journeys there in the final season of the Clone Wars, while pursuing deeper understanding of the Force. The planet appears lifeless beneath a red sky, its valleys lined with enormous stone tombs carved into mountain faces. Darth Bane himself manifests there through a dark side illusion during Yoda's trial, reminding viewers that Moraband remained spiritually dangerous long after its rulers had died. Canon offers only fragments, but those fragments speak with remarkable consistency. This was a place where darkness accumulated rather than faded. Why would a planet itself become synonymous with the dark side? The answer lies partly in the relationship between memory and the Force. Throughout Star Wars, locations touched repeatedly by powerful emotion retain an almost tangible presence. Dagobah shelters a cave steeped in darkness. Ach, too, preserves the quiet balance sought by the earliest Jedi. Exegol, much later, become saturated with generations of Sith ritual beneath endless storms. Moraband belongs in that same tradition. The Force remembers what happened there, even when historians no longer can. Every battle, every betrayal, every oath spoken beneath its crimson sky leaves an imprint difficult to erase. By the time of the Galactic Republic, familiar from the prequel films, the Jedi sincerely believed the Sith had been extinct for nearly a millennium. In The Phantom Menace, when Qui-Gon Jinn reports his encounter with Darth Maul after the Battle of Naboo in 32 BBY, the Jedi Council hesitates before accepting the impossible. Mace Windu calmly states, "I do not believe the Sith could have returned without us knowing." Ki-Adi-Mundi echoes that certainty by insisting the Sith had been extinct for 1,000 years. Their confidence was genuine. It also proved catastrophically wrong. For listeners who already know where this history ends, with Order 66, Darth Vader, and the rise of the Empire, that moment carries extraordinary irony. The greatest deception in galactic history had already succeeded before the first battle of the Clone Wars was ever fought. Yet our story has not reached Darth Sidious, or Darth Maul, or even Darth Bane. Those names belong to a much later age. Standing once more inside this forgotten stone chamber, with the crimson blade quietly illuminating walls carved before the Republic reached its height, you can almost sense how unimaginably old this history truly is. Somewhere in these silent corridors lies the beginning of an order that would reshape the destiny of the galaxy again and again, surviving defeat, extinction, and centuries of absolute secrecy. The chamber remains still. The lightsaber continues its low, steady hum, and just beyond the edge of its red light waits the first true birth of the Sith. Why did the fallen Jedi travel to one remote world instead of building their own empire anywhere in the vastness of the galaxy? That question sits at the beginning of Sith history because current canon tells us where the Sith eventually established themselves, but leaves much of the journey hidden behind the passing of millennia. Unlike the carefully documented Clone Wars or the reign of the Galactic Empire, these earliest centuries survive only in scattered references across modern canon. That silence is not an accident. Lucasfilm has deliberately left much of the ancient Sith era unexplored, preserving its mythic quality while confirming only the broadest outlines. Even so, those outlines reveal enough to understand how the greatest enemy of the Jedi truly came into existence. The world that became the heart of the Sith is known in modern canon as Moraband. Older stories from the expanded universe called it Korriban, and many longtime fans still instinctively use that name. Since 2014, however, current canon has consistently referred to the planet as Moraband, particularly through its appearance in the Clone Wars. It is a harsh world of jagged cliffs, endless deserts, crimson skies, and valleys filled with enormous stone tombs carved into the sides of mountains. Nothing about its landscape suggests comfort or prosperity. Instead, it feels ancient in the deepest sense of the word, as though every grain of red sand remembers those who came before. When Yoda arrives on Moraband during his spiritual journey near the end of the Clone Wars, he does not find bustling cities or armies waiting to greet him. He discovers silence. Towering mausoleums dominate the horizon, while dark side energy clings to the planet so completely that ordinary perception becomes unreliable. During his trial, the spirit-like image of Darth Bane appears before him, not as a living resurrection, but as an illusion shaped through the power of the dark side. The encounter demonstrates something important about Sith philosophy. Even after the deaths of generations of Dark Lords, Moraband remains a place where their influence refuses to disappear completely. Who were the people that gave the Sith their name? Current canon confirms that the Sith were originally a distinct species native to these worlds, long before the Order of Sith Lords came to dominate galactic history. The earliest fallen Jedi did not invent the word Sith. Instead, they encountered an existing civilization whose culture already possessed deep connections to the dark side of the Force. Over time, those exiled Force users rose to positions of power, ruling over the Sith species until the identities of conqueror and conquered gradually blended together. Eventually, the title Sith no longer described a biological people in everyday galactic language. It described followers of a philosophy built upon passion, domination, and the relentless pursuit of power. Canon intentionally avoids describing every stage of this transformation in detail, but its consequences become unmistakable. The Dark Lords adopted the traditions of their new home while reshaping them according to their own ambitions. Massive tomb complexes were raised to preserve rulers long after death. Ceremonial architecture emphasized permanence over beauty, with colossal statues staring across barren valleys as though they expected future generations to kneel before them. Knowledge became sacred property rather than shared wisdom. Every temple guarded secrets. Every relic carried meaning. Even the act of burial became another opportunity to display authority over both life and death. Why did Sith culture become so obsessed with immortality? That question echoes throughout every era of Star Wars, from ancient tombs on Moraband to Emperor Palpatine's laboratories on Exegol thousands of years later. The desire to overcome death appears again and again among the Sith, even though none of their greatest victories ever granted true peace. Ancient rulers preserved their teachings inside holocrons, powerful devices capable of storing knowledge that only Force-sensitive individuals could unlock. Canon repeatedly shows Sith holocrons surviving centuries, waiting patiently until another seeker proves capable of opening them. Unlike ordinary books or archives, these objects seem almost selective, revealing their contents only to those willing to embrace dangerous lessons. The contrast with the Jedi becomes increasingly clear. Jedi archives exist to preserve knowledge for future generations. Sith knowledge exists to control who deserves it. Inside the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, thousands of texts and records were available for study under careful guidance. Inside Sith sanctuaries, every lesson carried a test. Failure often meant death, corruption, or madness. Success demanded absolute commitment. Even the architecture reflected this philosophy. Jedi temples welcomed communities of learners. Sith strongholds isolated individuals until they stood alone before whatever trial awaited them. As Sith civilization matured, titles acquired tremendous importance. Dark Lord of the Sith became more than political authority. It represented mastery over every rival who sought the same position. There could be advisors, warriors, scholars, and servants, but supreme power always belonged to whoever proved strongest. The dark side rewarded victory rather than cooperation. Every ambitious apprentice studied under the assumption that one day the master would become an obstacle rather than a guide. Long before Darth Bane formalized the rule of two, betrayal already existed within the culture itself. Strength earned loyalty only until someone stronger appeared. Why does betrayal appear so naturally inside Sith history, while the Jedi emphasize trust between master and apprentice? The answer lies in the philosophies each order embraced. A Jedi master trains a student with the hope that one day the apprentice will surpass the teacher through wisdom and compassion. Success strengthens the order as a whole. Sith masters teach with a very different expectation. Knowledge is carefully rationed because every lesson given to the apprentice also creates a future rival. Fear becomes part of education. Suspicion becomes habit. Even genuine affection, when it exists at all, remains overshadowed by the certainty that ambition will eventually demand confrontation. Current canon does not present the ancient Sith as mindless worshippers of destruction. They built civilizations, maintained traditions, created symbols, and preserved their history across immense stretches of time. Yet every accomplishment carried the seed of instability because the culture measured worth through domination. Great rulers inspired fear more reliably than loyalty. Powerful apprentices constantly evaluated whether the master had begun to weaken. The dark side offered tremendous individual strength while quietly eroding the trust required to sustain lasting institutions. That contradiction would shape every Sith empire that followed, regardless of how vast its territory became. Many fans naturally wonder whether all of this history unfolded exactly as described in the older Knights of the Old Republic stories or other expanded universe material. Those beloved legends works introduced famous figures such as Ajunta Pall and explored detailed accounts of the exiled Dark Jedi establishing themselves on Korriban. They remain influential and continue inspiring discussion throughout the Star Wars community. Current canon, however, has not confirmed those events as historical fact. Instead, it preserves the destination. Moraband, the Sith species, the existence of ancient Dark Lords, while leaving the path deliberately obscured. That distinction matters because mystery has become part of the canon itself, inviting curiosity without replacing established facts. As the red sun sinks lower over Moraband's endless desert, long shadows stretch across rows of forgotten tombs. Wind whispers through broken stone entrances that once welcomed rulers convinced their names would never be forgotten. Many of those names have vanished from history all the same. Their temples endure, their symbols endure. And somewhere beyond these silent valleys, the first Sith Empire is preparing to emerge, carrying the dark side far beyond the borders of its desolate homeworld. Why did every Sith Empire eventually collapse, even when it possessed warriors capable of wielding the Force itself? It seems like a contradiction. The dark side granted extraordinary strength, immense political influence, and the ability to inspire fear across entire star systems, yet no ancient Sith civilization endured forever. Current canon confirms that long before the Republic believed the Sith extinct, vast conflicts had already swept across the galaxy. It also shows that many of the greatest reminders of those wars survived not in living governments, but in abandoned temples, shattered battlefields, and worlds that still carried scars long after their armies vanished. One of those worlds is Malachor. In the second season of Rebels, Ezra Bridger, Kanan Jarrus, and Ahsoka Tano arrive at an immense Sith temple hidden beneath its rocky surface. What they discover is unlike anything seen elsewhere in canon. The entire landscape appears frozen in the final instant of an ancient catastrophe. Thousands of figures remain turned to stone, locked forever in combat between Jedi and their enemies. Lightsabers still lie where they fell. Broken armor rests exactly where warriors collapsed centuries before. Canon never gives the precise date of this battle, nor does it identify every faction involved, but the implication is unmistakable. A conflict so immense erupted here that its consequences remained visible thousands of years later. The Sith Temple on Malachor demonstrates another defining feature of ancient Sith architecture. These structures were never merely places of worship. They functioned as weapons, laboratories, libraries, and instruments of control at the same time. Deep beneath the surface lies a gigantic superweapon powered through the dark side of the Force. When activated incorrectly, it threatens catastrophic destruction rather than simple victory. Darth Vader himself arrives seeking its secrets while Ahsoka confronts her former master among its collapsing chambers. By the end of the battle, much of the temple begins to destroy itself, continuing a pattern seen throughout Sith history. Their greatest creations rarely survive the ambitions of those attempting to possess them. Why were Sith temples so often built around dangerous artifacts instead of simple sanctuaries? The answer becomes clearer as different eras of canon begin to connect. Sith philosophy did not separate spiritual enlightenment from military power. Every lesson was expected to increase authority. Every relic offered another advantage over rivals. Holocrons stored forbidden knowledge. Ancient mechanisms amplified dark side energy. Hidden chambers protected secrets intended for only the strongest successors. Unlike the quiet meditation rooms inside the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, Sith structures constantly tested those who entered them. Failure could trigger deadly traps. Success granted knowledge that immediately became another source of temptation. Across canon, the Sith repeatedly surround themselves with objects that appear almost alive. Holocrons answer only Force-sensitive users capable of unlocking them. Sith masks continue influencing later generations. Ancient blades carry echoes of those who wielded them. In the rise of Skywalker, the Sith Wayfinder, recovered from the wreckage of the second Death Star, serves exactly this purpose. Without it, Exegol remains unreachable through its dangerous hyperspace anomalies. Possessing knowledge becomes just as important as possessing armies. The Sith understand that a hidden map can prove more valuable than an entire fleet if it leads to power no rival knows exists. Another question quietly emerges from these surviving relics. If the Sith possessed such remarkable knowledge, why did the Jedi not simply destroy every temple after defeating them? Canon suggests that the answer is more complicated than simple victory. Worlds such as Moraband, Malachor, and Exegol remain extraordinarily difficult to reach. Others became forgotten as galactic civilization shifted across thousands of years. Some locations were deliberately hidden behind dangerous hyperspace routes or natural hazards. Others were sealed because the Jedi recognized that entering them carried risks of corruption. Destroying a temple built upon immense concentrations of dark side energy was not always as simple as collapsing its walls. The Force itself appears to preserve memory within these places. When Ezra enters the Sith temple on Malachor, he experiences visions shaped by ancient events and lingering emotions. Similar phenomena appear elsewhere throughout canon. The cave beneath the island on Achto draws Rey into a deeply personal vision. Dagobah's dark side cave confronts Luke Skywalker with an image of Darth Vader bearing Luke's own face beneath the shattered helmet. These experiences differ in detail, yet they follow a common rule. Powerful locations do not merely contain history, they invite visitors to relive it through the language of the Force. Why does the dark side so often preserve suffering while the light side emphasizes release? That contrast sits at the heart of Sith philosophy. Jedi seek peace through acceptance, allowing fear and attachment to pass without controlling them. Sith pursue permanence. They refuse surrender. Every defeat becomes motivation for revenge. Every loss inspires another attempt to conquer death itself. This difference explains why so many Sith relics seem obsessed with preserving identity across centuries. Ancient rulers expected future generations to continue their work rather than simply remember their names. Even in death, they sought influence instead of rest. Current canon carefully avoids presenting the Sith as unstoppable conquerors. Instead, their history resembles repeated cycles of astonishing expansion, followed by equally devastating collapse. Entire empires rise through overwhelming strength before internal rivalries consume them. Apprentices overthrow masters, generals challenge rulers, alliances dissolve the moment victory appears secure. The dark side grants individuals immense power while encouraging the very ambitions that ultimately fracture every regime. By comparison, the Republic often survives, not because it is stronger in every battle, but because cooperation proves more durable than fear over centuries. Many longtime Star Wars fans immediately think of the Old Republic era when discussing these ancient conflicts. Here, the distinction between canon and legends becomes especially important. Stories such as Knights of the Old Republic, and many earlier novels describe famous wars involving Darth Revan, Darth Malak, and numerous Sith empires. Those narratives remain part of the beloved Legends continuity and are not current canon. Modern canon has occasionally referenced names like Revan through visual details and reference materials, but it has not confirmed the full Legends histories as historical fact. Instead, it establishes a broader truth. Ancient wars between Jedi and Sith unquestionably occurred, while the precise chronology remains intentionally open for future storytelling. One consequence of those forgotten wars still echoes across later generations. By the time of the High Republic, centuries before the Phantom Menace, the Republic enjoys extraordinary prosperity. Starlight Beacon shines as a symbol of exploration. Jedi travel confidently into the Outer Rim, believing they understand the dangers facing the galaxy. Yet beneath countless worlds lie temples, relics, and tombs built during far older struggles. Most citizens never suspect they exist. Even many Jedi know them only through restricted archives. History has not disappeared. It has simply gone quiet, waiting for someone curious enough or reckless enough to disturb it again. The wind continues sweeping across Malachor's stone plain, long after the final lightsaber has fallen silent. Statues of forgotten warriors stand exactly where they met their end, neither victorious nor defeated, only preserved. Above them, stars drift across the night exactly as they did thousands of years before. The Sith empires believed their dominion would last forever. Instead, they left behind abandoned temples, unanswered questions, and one survivor whose response to those endless failures would reshape the next 1,000 years of galactic history. A Dark Lord who concluded that the Sith's greatest enemy had never truly been the Jedi at all. Why did the Sith disappear for 1,000 years instead of conquering the galaxy while the Jedi believed them extinct? It is one of the most remarkable reversals in Star Wars history. Every ancient Sith empire had risen with overwhelming force and fallen through internal betrayal, leaving behind ruined worlds like Moraband and Malachor. Then, around 1000 BBY, the pattern changed completely. Rather than building another empire, one Dark Lord concluded that the Sith themselves had become the architects of their own destruction. His name was Darth Bane, and although current canon reveals only portions of his story, those fragments permanently altered the fate of the galaxy. The first clear canonical appearance of Darth Bane comes during Yoda's vision on Moraband in the Clone Wars. Towering in dark armor and speaking with absolute confidence, he identifies himself as the creator of the Rule of Two. Yoda immediately recognizes the significance of the name, demonstrating that the Jedi still remembered Bane as a historical figure, despite believing the Sith extinct. The vision itself is an illusion born from the dark side rather than Bane's surviving consciousness. Yet the information it delivers aligns with everything later established about Sith history. Even after a millennium, the Rule of Two remained the foundation upon which Darth Sidious built his empire. One decision made centuries earlier still governed every Sith Lord alive during the fall of the Republic. Current canon confirms the Rule of Two in clear terms. There would be only two Sith at any given time, one master to embody power and one apprentice to crave it. The principle appears repeatedly throughout the prequel era. Darth Sidious trains Darth Maul. After Maul's apparent death on Naboo in 32 BBY, Sidious raises Count Dooku, known as Darth Tyrannus, as his new apprentice. When Dooku's usefulness ends aboard the Invisible Hand in 19 BBY, Sidious orders Anakin Skywalker to execute him without hesitation. Shortly afterward, Anakin becomes Darth Vader, continuing the same uninterrupted line. Every transition follows the logic established 1,000 years before. Why would a philosophy built on betrayal deliberately limit itself to only two members? At first glance, the idea seems dangerously fragile. One accident could erase the entire Sith Order forever. Yet Darth Bane appears to have recognized something every earlier generation had ignored. Large numbers created factions. Factions created rival armies. Rival armies inevitably turned their lightsabers against one another before the Jedi could even finish the battle. By reducing the Order to only a master and an apprentice, the Sith concentrated knowledge instead of scattering it across competing warlords. The rivalry remained, but it became focused, controlled, and ultimately productive from the Sith point of view. The relationship between master and apprentice was never intended to be peaceful. A Sith master did not train a successor out of generosity. The apprentice existed to become powerful enough to challenge the teacher when the time arrived. If the apprentice failed, the master remained worthy of leadership. If the apprentice succeeded, the order became stronger because weakness had been eliminated. The system transformed betrayal from an unfortunate consequence into an essential mechanism of survival. Where ancient Sith empires collapsed beneath endless civil wars, the rule of two confined that struggle to a single relationship. This philosophy stands in deliberate contrast to the Jedi tradition. Within the Jedi Order, masters openly shared their knowledge with Padawans because wisdom belonged to the entire community. Obi-Wan Kenobi wanted Anakin Skywalker to become a great Jedi Knight. Later, Luke Skywalker hoped to rebuild an order that could pass knowledge freely to future generations. Sith training pursued the opposite goal. Every lesson strengthened the individual while preserving the hierarchy. A master constantly evaluated whether too much knowledge had already been given away. An apprentice constantly searched for the remaining secret still being withheld. The rule of two also transformed the Sith from conquerors into infiltrators. Earlier Dark Lords announced themselves through fleets, armies, and open warfare. Darth Bane's descendants learned patience instead. The Jedi Council believed the Sith extinct because that was precisely what the Sith wanted them to believe. Rather than seizing Coruscant through military conquest, they began preparing to capture it through politics, economics, influence, and deception. The Republic would not fall because an invading army overwhelmed its defenses. It would collapse from within, while almost no one realized the Sith had returned at all. Why did the Jedi accept the extinction of their greatest enemy so completely? The answer reflects both their wisdom and their limitations. For nearly 1,000 years, before the Phantom Menace, the Republic experienced extraordinary stability compared with the ancient Sith Wars. The Jedi settled disputes, protected hyperspace routes, and served as respected guardians of peace. Generation after generation passed without confirmed Sith activity. Archives became history rather than urgent warning. Young Jedi learned about the Sith in much the same way modern historians study vanished civilizations. The danger seemed real in the past, but no longer immediate. That confidence shaped the reactions inside the Jedi Council chamber after Qui-Gon Jinn encountered Darth Maul on Tatooine and Naboo in 32 BBY. Qui-Gon described a warrior wielding a red lightsaber with extraordinary skill. He stated plainly that he believed he had fought a Sith Lord, yet Mace Windu answered with genuine disbelief, insisting the Sith could not have returned unnoticed. Ki Adi Mundi repeated that they had been extinct for a millennium. None of the council members were foolish. They were responding to 1,000 years of carefully engineered deception that had worked exactly as Darth Bane intended. Current canon remains intentionally quiet about many of the Sith who carried the rule of two across those intervening centuries. Their names, worlds, and struggles are largely absent from official storytelling. This silence has encouraged many fans to revisit the older Legends continuity, where numerous Dark Lords filled those missing generations with detailed adventures and rivalries. Those stories remain fascinating, but they belong to the non-canon expanded universe. Canon itself leaves the 1,000-year chain mostly hidden, allowing one simple truth to stand above every missing detail. Each master successfully passed the order to a single apprentice, and the line never broke. The achievement becomes even more astonishing when viewed across the full sweep of galactic history. Ancient Sith empires had measured success in conquered systems and marching legions. Darth Bane measured success in survival. He accepted that no Sith alive during his own lifetime would witness ultimate victory. Instead, each generation would move the plan forward by only a small distance before entrusting it to the next. The Sith abandoned impatience, the very emotion they so often encouraged in others. They became willing to wait centuries if that patience eventually delivered absolute power. As another cold night settles over Moraband, the enormous tombs stand exactly as they did when Yoda walked among them. Wind carries fine red sand across forgotten stairways leading into darkness below. Somewhere inside those silent chambers, the memory of Darth Bane still lingers, not because his empire survived, but because his idea survived. Every Sith Lord who followed inherited more than a title. They inherited a strategy capable of outlasting armies, republics, and generations of Jedi who never realized that the greatest victory the Sith ever achieved began the moment they chose to disappear. How can an order with only 2 members quietly defeat an entire civilization that spans millions of worlds? The answer does not begin with a lightsaber duel or the construction of a superweapon. It begins with patience measured not in years, but in centuries. After Darth Bane established the rule of 2 around 1000 BBY, the Sith disappeared so completely that generation after generation of Jedi accepted their extinction as settled history. Yet while the Republic celebrated peace, somewhere in the darkness, a single master continued instructing a single apprentice, preserving knowledge that no archive on Coruscant could ever record. For almost 1,000 years, the Galactic Republic entered one of the longest periods of relative stability in its history. Hyperlanes expanded farther into the outer rim. Trade-connected worlds separated by thousands of light years. The Galactic Senate on Coruscant grew into the political center of known civilization, where representatives from countless species debated taxation, diplomacy, commerce, and local disputes beneath the enormous dome of the Senate building. During this era, the Jedi Order continued serving as guardians of peace rather than soldiers. Younglings trained inside the Jedi Temple, Padawans accompanied their masters across the galaxy, and few living beings imagined they were witnessing the calm before one of history's greatest catastrophes. The Jedi Temple itself reflected that confidence, rising high above the endless cityscape of Coruscant. Its 5 towers overlooked skylanes crowded with civilian transports and Republic cruisers. Within its walls stood the famous archives overseen by librarians such as Jocasta Nu during the final decades of the Republic. Holocrons containing centuries of accumulated knowledge rested in carefully protected vaults. Meditation chambers remained open to every Jedi seeking clarity through the Force. Unlike the hidden tombs of Moraband, the temple welcomed openness rather than secrecy. Knowledge gained value by being shared responsibly instead of being hidden from rivals. Why did the Sith abandon armies when the Republic seemed so vulnerable? Because Darth Bane had recognized something his predecessors never fully accepted. Armies announce themselves. Governments prepare for visible enemies. A hidden enemy enjoys far greater freedom. Rather than attacking Coruscant from orbit, the Sith could influence senators, merchants, financiers, and ambitious officials without revealing their existence. Every small compromise weakened the Republic a little more. Every corrupt decision convinced citizens that their institutions no longer deserved complete trust. No battle needed to be fought if confidence itself slowly collapsed. Current canon deliberately leaves most of these 1,000 hidden years undocumented. We know the rule of two endured because Darth Sidious inherited it. We know the line remained unbroken because the Sith returned exactly as Darth Bane intended. Beyond those broad facts, canon provides remarkably little detail about the individual masters and apprentices who carried the tradition forward. That silence creates one of the largest historical gaps in Star Wars storytelling. It also allows the imagination to picture quiet transfers of forbidden knowledge beneath forgotten ruins inside isolated estates, or aboard anonymous starships crossing hyperspace, unnoticed by the Republic they intended to destroy. This hidden existence demanded extraordinary discipline. Sith apprentices could not seek public recognition or glorious military victories. They learned to suppress ambition until the proper moment arrived. Imagine a master extinguishing every light inside a secluded chamber before opening a crimson Sith holocron whose knowledge had survived countless generations. The apprentice would not simply memorize techniques with a lightsaber. They would study history, politics, economics, languages, and the psychology of entire civilizations. The Sith were no longer preparing to conquer worlds, one campaign at a time. They were preparing to manipulate the galaxy itself. Why did the Republic fail to notice that something was changing beneath its surface? Part of the answer lies in the Republic's own success. A government that survives for thousands of years naturally develops confidence in its institutions. Senators trusted established procedures. Bureaucracies expanded layer upon layer until even simple decisions required endless negotiation. The Jedi, meanwhile, became increasingly occupied with maintaining peace across thousands of systems. Their responsibilities multiplied alongside the Republic's growth. Every crisis demanded attention, making it easier for quieter dangers to remain unseen. By the final century before the Battle of Naboo, subtle weaknesses had become increasingly visible. Large commercial organizations wielded enormous political influence inside the Senate. The Trade Federation, officially a trade guild, maintained fleets of heavily armed Lucrehulk-class battleships and extensive droid armies. Corporate alliances negotiated directly with senators while protecting their own financial interests across entire sectors. None of this proved that the Sith had already infiltrated galactic politics, yet it demonstrated how complex and vulnerable the Republic had become. Institutions built for cooperation could also become vulnerable to careful manipulation. The Jedi sensed disturbances in the Force during these later years, but they struggled to identify the source. In Attack of the Clones, Mace Windu openly states that the Jedi's ability to use the Force has diminished. Later, Chancellor Palpatine remarks that the dark side clouds everything, making the future difficult, even for Master Yoda to perceive. These are not empty observations. They reveal that by 22 BBY, the Sith had already achieved one of their greatest strategic victories. Without openly declaring war, they had succeeded in obscuring the vision of the very guardians tasked with protecting the Republic. Many fans have proposed an intriguing theory about this gradual blindness. Although current canon never confirms it outright, a popular interpretation suggests that generations of Sith ritual hidden across centuries slowly strengthened the dark side's influence around key locations such as Coruscant itself. Others argue that the clouding resulted primarily from Darth Sidious's own extraordinary power during the Republic's final decades. Canon leaves the exact mechanism unresolved. What it clearly establishes is the outcome. The Jedi no longer saw the future with the same certainty they once possessed, while the Sith understood exactly how valuable that uncertainty would become. As the 1,000-year conspiracy approached its final generation, the Sith no longer needed to wonder whether Darth Bane's strategy had worked. The Republic believed they were extinct. The Jedi searched for dangers they could neither see nor fully understand. Across Coruscant, senators argued beneath glittering chandeliers while traffic streamed endlessly between impossibly tall towers. Deep below that magnificent city, ancient foundations supported every shining avenue above them. The Sith plan resembled those unseen foundations, invisible to almost everyone, patiently bearing unimaginable weight. It waited only for the arrival of one apprentice who possessed the ambition, intelligence, and cruelty to transform a hidden order into the master of the galaxy. Why did the 1,000-year plan finally begin moving at breathtaking speed during the last decades of the Republic? The answer centers on two Sith whose relationship shaped everything that followed: Darth Plagueis and Darth Sidious. Current canon confirms the existence of Darth Plagueis through Chancellor Palpatine's famous conversation with Anakin Skywalker at the galaxy's opera house in Revenge of the Sith. Although the 2012 novel Darth Plagueis belongs to the Legends continuity and cannot be treated as canon, the essential outline remains firmly established. Plagueis was real. He trained Palpatine, and before the Republic fell, the apprentice surpassed the master exactly as the rule of two demanded. The opera performance on Coruscant unfolds with remarkable calm. Colored lights drift across the stage while musicians perform beneath floating platforms, and Palpatine chooses this peaceful setting to tell what he calls the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise. His voice never rises. He describes a Sith Lord so powerful and knowledgeable that he could influence midichlorians to create life and prevent those he cared about from dying. Then comes the quiet conclusion. He could save others from death, but not himself. Palpatine explains that Plagueis was killed by his own apprentice while sleeping. He never names himself as that apprentice, yet the truth becomes unmistakable as Anakin listens. Why did Palpatine reveal such dangerous information to a Jedi Knight? Because every sentence carried two meanings. On the surface, it sounded like an ancient legend, illustrating the limits of power. Beneath that surface, it became a carefully constructed temptation, aimed directly at Anakin Skywalker. Anakin feared losing Padme Amidala after experiencing terrifying visions of her death, just as he had failed to prevent the death of his mother, Shmi Skywalker, years earlier on Tatooine. Palpatine recognized that fear. Rather than offering immediate answers, he presented the possibility that the dark side possessed knowledge the Jedi refused to teach. It was not merely a story, it was recruitment. Current canon never fully explains the extent of Darth Plagueis' experiments with the Force. Palpatine claims that Plagueis learned to manipulate life itself through extraordinary mastery of the dark side. Whether every detail in that tale is literally true remains uncertain, because the only source is Palpatine, one of the greatest deceivers in galactic history. Some listeners notice this immediately and wonder whether the Chancellor exaggerated his master's accomplishments to make the Sith appear even more irresistible. That question remains open inside canon. What matters historically is that Anakin believed enough of the story to continue listening. While Darth Plagueis explored forbidden knowledge, his apprentice pursued another battlefield entirely. Sheev Palpatine was born on Naboo and eventually entered public life as a politician, representing his homeworld in the Galactic Senate. To almost everyone who met him, he appeared courteous, intelligent, patient, and deeply committed to the Republic. Senators respected him, colleagues underestimated him. The Jedi sensed nothing unusual about the soft-spoken statesman who frequently stood only a few corridors away from the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. The greatest disguise in Sith history required neither armor nor a mask. It required perfect self-control. Why choose politics instead of open conquest after centuries of waiting? Because political authority granted something armies never could: legitimacy. If a Sith seized power through invasion, the galaxy would unite against him. If the Senate willingly elevated that same Sith to the office of Supreme Chancellor, countless citizens would defend his authority themselves. Darth Sidious understood that institutions could become weapons, laws could be reshaped, emergency powers could accumulate gradually. Every constitutional change could appear reasonable when presented as a temporary response to crisis. The Republic would hand him control while believing it was protecting democracy. That carefully prepared crisis arrived in 32 BBY with the blockade of Naboo. The Trade Federation, protesting taxation imposed by the Republic, surrounded the peaceful world using its massive Lucrehulk-class control ships. Queen Padme Amidala escaped aboard the Royal Naboo starship alongside Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn and his apprentice Obi-Wan Kenobi. On Tatooine, they encountered a 9-year-old slave named Anakin Skywalker, whose extraordinary connection to the Force immediately drew Qui-Gon's attention. By the time the Battle of Naboo concluded, countless destinies had quietly intersected. None of the participants fully understood how perfectly Darth Sidious had arranged the pieces. The Battle of Naboo itself unfolded across several fronts at once. Naboo starfighters attacked the orbiting droid control ship. Gungan warriors under Boss Nass engaged the Trade Federation's battle droids across the grassy plains. Queen Amidala led a strike team into the royal palace to capture Viceroy Newt Gunray. Meanwhile, deep inside the Theed power generator complex, Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi confronted Darth Maul. It was the first confirmed appearance of a Sith warrior in nearly 1,000 years. The duel ended with Qui-Gon's death and Maul apparently falling into the reactor shaft after Obi-Wan struck him in half. Why did Darth Sidious send Darth Maul instead of remaining hidden himself? Because Maul was both apprentice and instrument. Raised from childhood within Sith teachings, Maul possessed extraordinary skill. With his double-bladed lightsaber and unwavering loyalty to his master, his purpose was to eliminate obstacles without exposing Sidious' political identity. Even after Maul's apparent defeat, Sidious had already achieved his primary objective. The Naboo crisis generated enough sympathy and political instability for Palpatine to replace Chancellor Finis Valorum as Supreme Chancellor of the Republic. A Sith now controlled the highest elected office in the galaxy, and almost no one suspected the truth. The Jedi Council recognized only part of what had happened. They knew a Sith Lord had returned because Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan had fought one directly, yet uncertainty remained. Mace Windu asked the question that still echoes across Star Wars history. Always two there are, no more, no less, a master and an apprentice. If Darth Maul had fallen on Naboo, then somewhere another Sith still lived. The Council understood the rule of two well enough to recognize that the threat had not ended. What they did not realize was that the master they sought had already begun presiding over Senate sessions only a short distance away. Many fans have long debated one lingering mystery from this period. Was Darth Maul intended to become Sidious's permanent apprentice, or merely another step toward a more powerful successor? Current canon does not provide a definitive answer. Sidious later replaces Maul with Count Dooku and eventually abandons Dooku for Anakin Skywalker without hesitation. That pattern suggests that every apprentice remained valuable only while serving the larger plan. Loyalty flowed in one direction. To Darth Sidious, every relationship, even within the rule of two, ultimately existed to strengthen his own path toward absolute power. As night settles over Coruscant, the Senate building glows against an endless sea of lights stretching to the horizon. Republic gunships have not yet filled the skies. Clone troopers do not yet march through its halls. Citizens celebrate the election of a new chancellor, believing they have chosen a wise leader during a difficult moment in galactic history. Somewhere inside the immense city, the last apprentice has become the last master. The 1,000-year plan no longer waits in silence. It has begun moving openly, hidden in plain sight, beneath the reassuring smile of Chancellor Palpatine. Why did Darth Sidious spend years cultivating multiple dark side followers when the rule of two demanded only one master and one apprentice? The answer reveals that Sidious obeyed Darth Bane's philosophy while interpreting it with ruthless flexibility. He never abandoned the rule of two, but he constantly surrounded himself with useful servants who could be discarded the moment they became inconvenient. Some were true Sith, others were assassins, inquisitive agents, or Force-sensitive allies whose loyalty lasted only as long as they remained valuable. Every relationship became another move in a strategy that stretched from the Senate chamber to the battlefields of the Clone Wars. By 22 BBY, the galaxy had crossed the threshold into open conflict. The Battle of Geonosis marked the beginning of the Clone Wars, pitting the Galactic Republic against the Confederacy of Independent Systems. Clone troopers bred on Kamino deployed for the first time alongside Jedi generals, while separatist droid armies rolled out of enormous Geonosian foundries. Thousands of star systems chose sides. Venator-class star destroyers and Acclamator assault ships became familiar sights above Republic worlds, while the Separatists fielded Munificent-class frigates, Providence-class command ships, and swarms of vulture droids. To ordinary citizens, it appeared to be a war born from political disagreement. In truth, both sides answered to the same hidden Sith master. Count Dooku, once one of the Jedi Order's most respected masters, now served Darth Sidious under the Sith title, Darth Tyrannus. His fall had not been driven by simple greed or personal vengeance. Canon consistently portrays Dooku as a man deeply disillusioned with corruption inside the Republic and frustrated by what he viewed as the Jedi Council's growing complacency. Sidious recognized that frustration and transformed it into loyalty. As leader of the separatist movement, Dooku publicly appeared to be the Republic's greatest enemy, while secretly working to strengthen the Chancellor's authority. Every battle that claimed thousands of lives simultaneously increased Palpatine's emergency powers. Why would the Sith deliberately create a war in which both sides were destined to lose? Because victory on the battlefield was never the objective. Sidious wanted exhaustion. He wanted the Republic desperate enough to surrender freedoms in exchange for security, and he wanted the Jedi so deeply entangled in military command that they drifted away from the quiet role they had fulfilled for centuries. The Clone Wars accomplished exactly that. Jedi who once settled trade disputes now directed planetary invasions. The Guardians of Peace slowly became generals, while the Supreme Chancellor accumulated extraordinary constitutional authority with Senate approval. Amid this carefully managed conflict, another unexpected figure returned from apparent death. Darth Maul, whom Obi-Wan Kenobi had defeated during the Battle of Naboo in 32 BBY, survived by clinging to life through hatred alone. Canon presents his return in the Clone Wars, where savage Oprys discovers his broken former master living in madness on the junk world of Lotho Minor. Mechanical spider-like limbs carry him through mountains of abandoned machinery until Mother Talzin and the Night Sisters restore his mind and provide new cybernetic legs. Maul no longer serves as Sidious' apprentice. Instead, he becomes something far more dangerous, an independent dark side power with ambitions of his own. The Night Sisters of Dathomir occupy a unique place within Star Wars canon. They are not Sith, even though they wield powers associated with the dark side. Led by Mother Talzin, their magic differs noticeably from traditional Sith teachings, drawing upon rituals, green spectral energy, and ancient Dathomirian traditions, rather than the philosophical lineage established by Darth Bane. Talzin herself becomes one of the few individuals Sidious genuinely regards as a significant threat. Their rivalry stretches across multiple seasons of the Clone Wars, illustrating that the Sith never held a monopoly over every form of dark side knowledge within the galaxy. Why did Sidious react so violently when Maul began building his own criminal empire? If the rule of two allowed only one master and one apprentice, Maul technically no longer occupied either role. Yet Sidious recognized the greater danger immediately. Maul united organizations including Death Watch, Black Sun, the Pike Syndicate, and Crimson Dawn's predecessors into the Shadow Collective, creating a power structure independent of both the Republic and the Separatists. He conquered Mandalore through manipulation rather than direct invasion, and challenged established governments without Sidious' permission. The problem was not that Maul had become stronger. The problem was that he had become unpredictable. Their confrontation on Mandalore remains one of the most revealing lightsaber duels in modern Star Wars canon. Sidious travels personally to confront both Maul and Savage Opress, entering the throne room with unsettling confidence. He defeats Savage quickly, killing him before Maul's eyes, then overwhelms Maul in a fierce duel that demonstrates why he remained the most powerful Sith of his age. Yet Sidious chooses not to execute his former apprentice. Instead, he captures him, remarking that Maul still has other uses. Even in victory, Sidious refuses to waste a potentially valuable tool. While these struggles unfolded in secret, another apprentice unknowingly moved closer to the Sith every day. Anakin Skywalker continued distinguishing himself as one of the Republic's greatest military commanders. Alongside Captain Rex and the 501st Legion, he fought campaigns across Christophsis, Umbara, Ryloth, and countless other battlefronts depicted throughout the Clone Wars. His courage inspired clone troopers. His compassion saved civilians. Yet his growing attachment to Padme Amidala, his frustration with the Jedi Council, and his fear of losing those he loved created exactly the vulnerabilities Sidious had anticipated years earlier. The Chancellor never hurried the process. He simply waited. Why did the Jedi fail to recognize that their greatest enemy spent so much time inside their own political system? They investigated Sith conspiracies repeatedly throughout the war, yet every trail dissolved before reaching its true destination. Count Dooku openly declared that the Senate had fallen under the influence of a Dark Lord during Attack of the Clones, but his warning sounded like propaganda coming from the leader of the Separatists. The Jedi dismissed it because they had every reason to distrust its source. Sidious understood that the most effective lie often contains just enough truth to be ignored. By the final months of the Clone Wars, nearly every piece stood in position. The clone army answered secretly to hidden commands implanted within inhibitor chips. The Senate depended upon Palpatine's leadership more than ever before. The Jedi had become isolated from much of the public they served, viewed increasingly as military commanders instead of impartial guardians. Anakin Skywalker had grown closer to the Chancellor than to many members of the Council. Across the galaxy, battles still raged between Republic and Separatist fleets, but their outcome no longer mattered. The war itself had become the weapon, and the Sith no longer needed to win it. They needed only to end it at precisely the right moment. Why did the Sith finally triumph at the exact moment they appeared to be defending the Republic? The answer unfolds over only a few extraordinary days. In 19 BBY, after 1,000 years of preparation, every deception engineered since Darth Bane's time converged into a single sequence of events so carefully arranged that almost every major player believed they were acting of their own free will. The Clone Wars approached their conclusion. The Separatist leadership was isolated. The Jedi Council had begun to suspect Chancellor Palpatine's growing authority, but they remained one step behind every revelation. By the time they understood the truth, the Sith no longer needed to hide. The final campaign begins above Coruscant. General Grievous launches a daring assault on the Republic capital, capturing Chancellor Palpatine aboard the Invisible Hand. Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker fight their way through the Separatist flagship, confronting Count Dooku in one of the defining duels of the war. Dooku defeats Obi-Wan temporarily, leaving Anakin alone before his Sith rival. After a fierce battle, Anakin severs both of Dooku's hands and leaves the former Jedi kneeling, defenseless. Then Palpatine quietly speaks the words that reveal the true nature of the entire conflict. kill him. Why did Sidious sacrifice an apprentice who had served him faithfully throughout the Clone Wars? Because Dooku had completed his purpose. He had led the Separatists, prolonged the war, weakened the Republic, and helped isolate the Jedi from the citizens they protected. Now Sidious required someone younger, stronger, and far more emotionally vulnerable. Anakin hesitates before striking the fatal blow, reminding the Chancellor that executing an unarmed prisoner violates the Jedi way. Palpatine dismisses the concern with chilling simplicity. He was too dangerous to be left alive. Those words would return only hours later under very different circumstances. Back on Coruscant, the pressure surrounding Anakin steadily increases. The Jedi Council grants him a seat among its members, but refuses to recognize him as a Jedi Master, a decision that deeply wounds his pride. At the same time, Palpatine privately appoints him as his personal representative to the Council, creating distrust between Anakin and the other Jedi. Meanwhile, terrifying visions of Padme Amidala dying during childbirth continue haunting his sleep. The Force, which had once guided him with remarkable clarity, now becomes inseparable from fear. Sidious does not create these emotions. He patiently redirects them. The turning point arrives inside the Chancellor's office. Palpatine finally reveals his true identity, calmly admitting to Anakin that he is the Sith Lord the Jedi have been searching for throughout the war. Instead of reaching immediately for his lightsaber, he offers something Anakin believes no one else can provide: the knowledge to save Padme from death. Canon never confirms whether Sidious genuinely possessed such power. What matters is that Anakin desperately wanted to believe it existed. The promise became stronger than certainty. Hope became more persuasive than evidence. Why did Mace Windu decide that Palpatine had to die instead of standing trial? After Anakin reports the Chancellor's confession, Mace leads Kit Fisto, Asian Kolar, and Saesee Tiin directly to the Chancellor's office. The confrontation lasts only moments. Sidious ignites his crimson lightsaber and kills Kolar, Tiin, and Fisto with astonishing speed before engaging Windu in a prolonged duel. Windu eventually gains the upper hand, disarming Sidious near the shattered office window overlooking Coruscant. At that moment, he concludes that the Chancellor controls the Senate and the courts too completely to be imprisoned safely. He has control of the Senate and the courts. He's too dangerous to be left alive. The irony is devastating. Windu unknowingly repeats almost the exact justification Sidious had used to persuade Anakin into executing Dooku. Anakin arrives just as the confrontation reaches its climax. Torn between loyalty to the Jedi and terror over Padme's future, he pleads with Windu to arrest the Chancellor instead of killing him. Windu refuses, believing there is no longer any safe alternative. In one irreversible decision, Anakin cuts off Windu's hand, allowing Sidious to unleash torrents of Force lightning that send the Jedi Master falling through the broken window into the depths of Coruscant. Whether Windu died immediately or survived the fall has inspired countless fan theories, but current canon treats his death as the end of his story. For Anakin, there is no returning from what has just happened. Sidious immediately renames his new apprentice Darth Vader. The ceremony is astonishingly brief. No celebration follows. No elaborate ritual takes place inside an ancient Sith temple. Instead, the title passes quietly in the dim light of the Chancellor's office, almost as though the 1,000-year history of the Sith has been condensed into a single whispered command. Vader kneels, accepting a future he barely understands, because he believes it is the only remaining path towards saving the woman he loves. The tragedy of Anakin Skywalker lies not in suddenly becoming someone else, but in believing he can still accomplish good through terrible choices. Why was the destruction of the Jedi entrusted to the clone army rather than to Vader alone? The answer had been prepared years earlier on Kamino. Every clone carried an inhibitor chip secretly designed to enforce contingency orders without hesitation. When Sidious transmits the words, "Execute Order 66," commanders across the galaxy respond immediately. Commander Cody turns against Obi-Wan Kenobi on Utapau. Bly opens fire on Aayla Secura on Felucia. Gree attacks Yoda on Kashyyyk before being defeated. Plo Koon is shot down over Cato Neimoidia. Across dozens of battlefronts, Jedi who had fought beside their clone troops for years suddenly find themselves surrounded by enemies they never expected. At the same time, Darth Vader marches into the Jedi Temple at the head of the 501st Legion. The building that had stood for centuries as the spiritual center of the Order becomes a battlefield. Canon makes clear that Vader kills Jedi Knights, Masters, Temple Guards, and even younglings inside its halls. The temple library burns. Meditation chambers become combat zones. Holocrons and ancient knowledge disappear into Imperial hands. By dawn, one of the greatest institutions in galactic history has effectively ceased to exist. The Sith do not merely defeat the Jedi in battle. They erase the foundation upon which the Order had rested for generations. The final act unfolds on Mustafar. Sidious sends Vader to eliminate the Separatist Council gathered there, including Newt Gunray, Wat Tambor, Poggle the Lesser, San Hill, Shu Mai, and the remaining corporate leaders who had unknowingly served the Sith throughout the war. With cold efficiency, Vader executes every one of them, bringing the Clone Wars to an end. Moments later, Obi-Wan arrives and confronts his former apprentice beside rivers of molten lava. Their duel leaves Vader horribly burned and mutilated before Sidious rescues him and encases him within the black-armored life support suit that will define him for decades. At almost the same moment, Padme dies after giving birth to Luke and Leia Skywalker, while Sidious cruelly tells Vader that he himself was responsible for her death. As smoke rises from the ruined Jedi Temple, the Senate gathers once more beneath the immense dome on Coruscant. Palpatine declares that the Republic will be reorganized into the First Galactic Empire for a safe and secure society. Thunderous applause echoes through the chamber. Senators who fear chaos welcome stability without realizing what they have surrendered. The 1,000-year plan is complete. The Sith no longer whisper from forgotten tombs beneath the red skies of Moraband. They rule openly from the very heart of the galaxy. Why did Darth Vader continue searching for ancient Sith knowledge after the Sith had already achieved total victory? At first glance, there seems to be nothing left to accomplish. The Jedi Order had been shattered. The Galactic Empire ruled nearly every known system. Darth Sidious occupied the Imperial Palace on Coruscant, while his apprentice commanded fleets capable of crushing planetary resistance. Yet the Sith were never satisfied with power they already possessed. Victory did not end their search. It merely changed the direction of that search. from conquering the galaxy to mastering death, destiny, and the Force itself. The years immediately following Order 66 reveal a galaxy transformed almost beyond recognition. Clone troopers gradually gave way to recruited Imperial stormtroopers. Venator-class star destroyers, familiar from the Clone Wars, slowly disappeared as larger Imperial-class star destroyers entered service. The Imperial Security Bureau expanded its surveillance across countless sectors. Governors increasingly replaced local representatives as the Emperor centralized authority. On Coruscant, the former Jedi Temple became the Imperial Palace, one of the most symbolic acts of the new regime. The building that had once represented balance and service now stood as the political heart of authoritarian rule. Darth Vader occupied a unique position within this new order. He answered directly to Emperor Palpatine and outranked nearly every military officer, yet he did not govern sectors or command the Senate. Instead, he became the Emperor's enforcer. Imperial admirals feared his arrival aboard their bridges. Moffs understood that failure carried consequences beyond ordinary military discipline. Yet beneath the armor and mechanical breathing, Anakin Skywalker had not vanished completely. Canon consistently portrays Vader as a man trapped between absolute loyalty to the Sith and memories he desperately tries to bury. That internal conflict never makes him less dangerous. It makes him more complicated. Why did Sidious create the Inquisitorius instead of simply allowing Vader to hunt surviving Jedi alone? The answer reflects practical necessity rather than a violation of the rule of two. The Inquisitors were not Sith lords. They were former Jedi, temple guards, and other Force-sensitive individuals corrupted into serving the Empire without receiving the full teachings of the Sith. Their purpose was to locate fugitives, recover Force-sensitive children, and eliminate isolated survivors who did not require Vader's direct attention. By denying them true Sith status, Sidious preserved Darth Bane's lineage while greatly expanding the Empire's reach. The headquarters of the Inquisitorius stood on the water-covered moon of Nur, hidden within the volcanic Mustafar system. Fortress Inquisitorius rises directly from the dark ocean, its towering black walls appearing almost inseparable from the surrounding cliffs. The facility features prominently in Jedi, Fallen Order, and later in Obi-Wan Kenobi, revealing interrogation chambers, training halls, meditation rooms, and underwater access tunnels. It serves as prison, academy, archive, and execution center all at once. Even its location carries symbolic meaning. Sidious built one of his most important institutions in the same system where Anakin Skywalker lost nearly everything that had once defined him. The individual Inquisitors each followed different paths into Imperial service. The Grand Inquisitor had once served as a temple guard inside the Jedi Temple, on Coruscant before embracing the Empire. The second sister, Trilla Suduri, fell after enduring Imperial torture following Order 66, a tragedy explored in Jedi Fallen Order. Reva Savander, later known as the third sister in Obi-Wan Kenobi, survived Vader's assault on the temple as a youngling before secretly pursuing revenge against him. These stories share an important pattern. The Empire preferred broken people. Pain became a recruitment tool, almost as valuable as ideology. Why did Vader personally continue visiting worlds connected to ancient Sith history? Canon repeatedly shows that his duties extended beyond military campaigns. On Mustafar, he established Fortress Vader, a towering obsidian castle built above the lava fields where Obi-Wan Kenobi had defeated him. The location was not chosen out of sentiment. Vader believed the immense suffering associated with Mustafar strengthened the dark side there, making it a suitable place to pursue forbidden knowledge and commune more deeply with Sith teachings. Current canon comics portray him seeking visions, relics, and greater understanding through the planet's unique connection to the Force. Victory over the Jedi had not answered his deepest questions. Ancient Sith artifacts continued resurfacing throughout the Imperial era. Holocrons remained among the most coveted objects in the galaxy because they preserved teachings unavailable anywhere else. In Rebels, both Sith and Jedi holocrons become central to Ezra Bridger's journey, demonstrating that these devices remained extraordinarily powerful decades after the Republic's fall. When Ezra and Maul combine a Jedi holocron with a Sith holocron, the Force reveals fragmented visions neither could have accessed independently. Knowledge itself becomes dangerous. The wrong question can reshape an entire life. Why did Emperor Palpatine remain fascinated by forgotten Sith worlds instead of ruling comfortably from Coruscant? Because political authority had never been his final ambition. Canon repeatedly connects Palpatine with hidden observatories, ancient temples, and locations rich in dark side energy. The observatory on Jakku, explored through novels and comics, served purposes extending far beyond ordinary military operations. Other facilities appeared on Pilio and elsewhere across the Empire, quietly gathering knowledge while the Imperial Navy projected visible strength. Even at the height of his rule, Sidious behaved less like a satisfied emperor than like a scholar, obsessed with discovering one final secret. The destruction of the first Death Star in 0BBY changed the emotional landscape of the Sith as much as the military balance of the galaxy. Grand Moff Tarkin died aboard the station. Luke Skywalker, trained only briefly by Obi-Wan Kenobi, accomplished what the Imperial Navy considered impossible by destroying the battle station during the Battle of Yavin. Vader survived only because he had been pulled away from the trench moments before the explosion. For the first time since proclaiming the Empire, the Sith faced undeniable evidence that the future remained uncertain. A farm boy from Tatooine had introduced variables Sidious could not entirely predict. Many fans have wondered whether Vader secretly hoped Luke might help overthrow the Emperor, even before their famous confrontation on Cloud City. Current canon strongly supports the idea that Vader became increasingly interested in his son after discovering Luke's identity. The 2015 Darth Vader comic series shows Vader learning that the pilot responsible for destroying the Death Star bears the surname Skywalker. From that moment onward, his perspective begins shifting. He remains loyal to the Empire in action, yet another possibility quietly emerges. Instead of serving Sidious forever, Vader begins imagining a future in which the rule of two might continue through father and son. As the corridors of Fortress Vader echo with the steady rhythm of mechanical breathing, lava glows through narrow windows, overlooking Mustafar's violent landscape. Ancient Sith philosophy surrounds the Dark Lord even though the Republic has long since vanished. Outside, Star Destroyers patrol an obedient empire stretching across the stars. Inside, Vader studies relics older than civilization itself, searching for answers his master still refuses to provide. The Sith have conquered the galaxy at last. Yet beneath their apparent triumph, the oldest weakness of the Order quietly begins to awaken once more. An apprentice who no longer sees his master as the final destination. Why did the Sith survive the destruction of the Empire when both Darth Sidious and Darth Vader seemed to perish at the Battle of Endor in 4 ABY? For many years, that question appeared to have a simple answer. The second Death Star exploded above the forest moon of Endor. Emperor Palpatine fell into the reactor shaft after Darth Vader lifted him and hurled him into its depths. Moments later, the battle station itself was destroyed as rebel starfighters escaped through collapsing tunnels of fire. The Sith lineage established by Darth Bane seemed to have ended at the hands of the apprentice who had finally turned against his master. Yet decades later, canon revealed that Sidious had prepared for failure long before Endor ever appeared on Imperial star charts. The final confrontation aboard the second Death Star remains one of the defining moments in Star Wars. Luke Skywalker willingly surrenders on Endor, believing there is still good within his father. Vader escorts him before the Emperor inside the immense throne room overlooking the unfinished battle station's super laser dish. Palpatine does not seek Luke's immediate death. Instead, he patiently attempts to provoke hatred, insisting that only anger will unlock the younger Skywalker's true potential. The strategy echoes everything he had done with Anakin decades earlier. The Sith continue recruiting not by inventing fear, but by exploiting fear already present. Luke briefly gives in to that temptation. After Vader threatens to turn Leia Organa to the dark side if Luke refuses, Luke launches a furious assault, overpowering Vader and severing his mechanical right hand. Standing above his defeated father, Luke sees the exposed machinery beneath the black glove. He looks at his own artificial hand and recognizes the path before him with startling clarity. Instead of delivering the final blow, he deactivates his lightsaber and declares, "I am a Jedi, like my father before me." In that quiet decision, the Sith lose the battle they have spent generations preparing to win. Why did Vader finally betray the Emperor after decades of absolute obedience? Current canon leaves no ambiguity about the emotional center of that decision. As Sidious unleashes Force lightning against Luke, Vader watches silently while his son refuses to abandon compassion. Despite unbearable suffering, the conflict that had remained buried beneath years of fear finally breaks free. Anakin Skywalker chooses his son over his master, lifting Sidious and throwing him into the reactor shaft, despite knowing the act will almost certainly kill him as well. The rule of two collapses in its oldest form. For the first time since Darth Bane, compassion defeats ambition inside the heart of a Sith apprentice. Anakin dies shortly afterward aboard the Death Star, asking Luke to remove his helmet so he can look upon his son with his own eyes. Luke later cremates his father's body on a funeral pyre beneath the forests of Endor. During the celebration that follows the rebel victory, Luke sees the Force spirits of Obi-Wan, Kenobi, Yoda, and Anakin Skywalker watching peacefully from a distance. Canon presents this as Anakin's redemption. He does not remain a Sith who performed one final good deed. he returns to the light through genuine self-sacrifice. The Sith lineage appears broken beyond repair. For many years, the galaxy believed exactly that. The Empire fractured into competing warlord states. The New Republic gradually established itself as the dominant galactic government. Luke Skywalker began searching for ancient Jedi knowledge while hoping to rebuild the order his father had once helped destroy. Imperial officers retreated toward unknown regions or fought desperate campaigns against the victorious alliance. To ordinary citizens, the age of the Sith had become history. Their 1,000-year conspiracy had ended inside the burning ruins of the Death Star. Why then did Emperor Palpatine later proclaim, "I have died before"? The answer leads far beyond Endor into one of the darkest locations in modern Star Wars canon. Hidden deep within the unknown regions lies Exegol, a storm-shrouded world concealed behind dangerous hyperspace anomalies. Massive lightning storms illuminate endless black skies above towering Sith citadels and subterranean laboratories. Unlike Coruscant, Exegol was never meant to inspire confidence. Unlike Moraband, it was not merely a graveyard of the past. It remained an active sanctuary where generations of secret preparations continued beyond the knowledge of both the Empire and the New Republic. The Sith eternal cult had quietly transformed Exegol into something extraordinary. Fanatical followers devoted themselves completely to Sith teachings, maintaining immense industrial complexes hidden beneath the planet's surface. Gigantic shipyards assembled Ziston-class star destroyers equipped with planet-killing axial superlasers. Vast chanting assemblies gathered inside colossal temples surrounding the Emperor's throne. These cultists were not Sith lords themselves. Like the Inquisitors before them, they served the Sith without inheriting the full lineage established through the rule of two. Their purpose was preservation rather than succession. Current canon establishes that Palpatine survived Endor through a combination of Sith knowledge and cloning technology, though at tremendous cost. The body seen on Exegol during the rise of Skywalker is physically unstable, sustained by mechanical apparatus suspended from immense cranes above the throne chamber. His own dialogue explains that the dark side of the Force is a pathway to many abilities, some considered to be unnatural, echoing the conversation he once held with Anakin at the galaxy's opera house. Yet this survival is not true immortality. His cloned form deteriorates rapidly, forcing him to search once again for a more permanent solution. Even after apparently conquering death, the Sith remain unsatisfied. Why did Palpatine invest so heavily in strand-cast experiments and hidden heirs instead of simply training another apprentice? Canon suggests that by this stage, the Emperor's ambitions had outgrown Darth Bane's original vision. He no longer sought a worthy successor capable of replacing him. He intended to continue ruling indefinitely through new vessels capable of containing his own spirit and power. The creation of Snoke, revealed on Exegol as an artificial being grown in vats, forms part of this larger effort. Snoke serves as a proxy leader for the First Order, while the true Sith Lord remains hidden, manipulating events from the shadows once again. Many fans immediately notice the familiar pattern. Once more, the Sith disappear after apparent defeat. Once more, they influence galactic politics without revealing themselves. Once more, an unsuspecting generation grows up believing the old darkness has passed forever. This repetition is not accidental. It reflects the central lesson Darth Bane introduced 1,000 years earlier. The Sith endure by embracing patience when necessary, accepting temporary invisibility if it eventually produces another opportunity to seize absolute power. As crimson lightning tears across Exegol's perpetual storms, enormous statues loom above endless ranks of silent followers. Machinery groans beneath the weight of unfinished star destroyers waiting for their first deployment. Somewhere within the darkness, ancient Sith chants blend with the crackle of unstable cloning equipment. The Empire has fallen. The Emperor has fallen. Yet neither event has erased the oldest dream of the Sith. Beneath the black skies of Exegol, that dream waits one final time for the galaxy to discover that its oldest enemy was never quite as dead as everyone believed. Why do the Sith continue casting such a long shadow over the galaxy even after their final defeat on Exegol in 35 ABY? The answer reaches beyond individual rulers and even beyond the rule of two itself. Empires can collapse in a single battle. Dynasties can end when a bloodline dies. Ideas endure differently. Across modern Star Wars canon, the Sith repeatedly leave behind teachings, relics, temples, and places where the dark side remains unusually strong, ensuring that future generations must confront their legacy, whether they seek it or not. The final destruction of Darth Sidious ends the Sith lineage established by Darth Bane, but it does not erase 1,000 years of history. The Battle of Exegol marks the last confirmed appearance of the Sith in current canon. Rey arrives on the Hidden World after following a Sith wayfinder recovered from the wreckage of the second Death Star on Kef Bir. There she discovers the immense throne chamber, surrounded by the chanting Sith Eternal. Emperor Palpatine attempts to persuade her to strike him down in anger so that the spirits of the Sith may continue through her, echoing the same manipulative pattern he had used with Anakin Skywalker and Luke Skywalker. Instead, events unfold differently. Rey refuses to become his successor. Ben Solo returns to the light after abandoning the identity of Kylo Ren, and together they bring the 1,000-year Sith conspiracy to its conclusion. Why does Palpatine repeatedly try to provoke his enemies into striking him down? The pattern appears in 3 different eras. He encourages Luke to kill him aboard the second Death Star. He tempts Rey on Exegol with almost identical language. Even earlier, he manipulated Anakin into executing Count Dooku, normalizing the idea that eliminating a helpless opponent could be justified. Canon never explains every metaphysical detail of Palpatine's intentions, but it consistently portrays him seeking domination through corruption rather than simple victory. A Sith triumphs most completely when an enemy willingly embraces Sith philosophy. Ben Solo's role in the final confrontation carries profound historical significance. Born decades after the fall of the Empire, he inherits neither the Sith lineage nor the Jedi tradition in a straightforward way. As Kylo Ren, he seeks Darth Vader's legacy while never becoming a Sith himself. Supreme Leader Snoke guides him, but Snoke is likewise never identified as a Sith Lord despite serving Palpatine's larger designs. This distinction matters. The First Order resembles the Empire politically, yet its leadership differs fundamentally from the Sith Order founded on Moraband and reshaped by Darth Bane. Even at the height of the First Order's power, the ancient lineage remains concentrated in Darth Sidious alone. The death of Palpatine on Exegol therefore represents something unique. Throughout Sith history, every master expected an apprentice to continue the tradition. Darth Bane anticipated succession. Darth Sidious replaced Darth Plagueis. Vader was intended to replace Dooku. But on Exegol, the chain finally breaks. Palpatine leaves behind no legitimate Sith apprentice because neither Rey nor Ben accepts the role he offers. The rule of two, which endured for approximately a millennium, reaches its natural end not through military defeat alone, but because no one remains willing to inherit it. Why do ancient Sith worlds remain dangerous even without living Sith lords? Current canon repeatedly demonstrates that places touched deeply by the Force retain extraordinary significance. Moraband continues radiating dark side energy long after its rulers disappear. Malachor preserves the memory of an ancient catastrophe. Exegol remains filled with colossal temples, hidden laboratories, and immense shipyards, abandoned after the Final Order's destruction. These worlds do not suddenly become ordinary planets simply because their masters have fallen. Their architecture, artifacts, and accumulated history remain available to anyone bold or reckless enough to seek them out. Sith holocrons represent perhaps the clearest example of this enduring legacy. Unlike living teachers, holocrons do not age, forget, or abandon their purpose. In Rebels, Ezra Bridger learns firsthand how dangerous curiosity can become when Sith knowledge answers sincere questions with seductive certainty. The holocron never forces obedience. Instead, it presents power as the logical solution to fear, uncertainty, or loss. That pattern mirrors the history of the Sith themselves. Their philosophy rarely begins with cruelty. It begins with understandable desires redirected toward domination. Modern canon also reminds us that the galaxy contains many Force traditions beyond the Jedi and the Sith. The Night Sisters of Dathomir continue preserving their own mystical practices. The Guardians of the Wills on Jedha follow a different spiritual path centered on the Force. The Loth Wolves, the Bendu, and other mysterious beings encountered in Rebels reveal aspects of the Force that neither the Jedi nor the Sith fully understood. This broader perspective places the Sith in proper context. They were extraordinarily influential, but they never possessed exclusive authority over the mysteries of the Force itself. Why then do the Sith remain the most recognizable embodiment of darkness in Star Wars? Partly because they repeatedly succeeded where other dark side groups did not. They reshaped the Republic into an empire. They destroyed the Jedi Order. They manipulated galactic history across 1,000 years through extraordinary patience. Yet another reason lies in symbolism. The crimson blade, the black robes, the towering temples carved into desolate worlds, and the whispered promise of forbidden power combine into an image that survives long after individual Sith lords have vanished. The galaxy remembers the Sith because their victories changed civilization itself. Many fans continue wondering whether another Sith order could someday arise. Current canon does not answer that question. It leaves the future deliberately open while establishing that ancient relics, forgotten worlds, and hidden knowledge still exist. A Sith holocron buried beneath stone remains dangerous whether anyone opens it today or 1,000 years from now. The Force remembers. History leaves traces. Whether those traces become the foundation of another order depends upon choices made by future generations rather than any surviving Sith master. The quiet lesson running beneath this entire history is striking. The Jedi repeatedly survive because they rebuild communities. The Sith repeatedly survive because they preserve ambition. One tradition grows through trust, the other grows through desire. Throughout every era, from the windswept cliffs of Aj to the crimson deserts of Moraband, from the Senate chambers of Coruscant to the endless storms above Exegol, the struggle has never truly been between two organizations alone. It has been between two radically different understandings of power itself. Far away on forgotten worlds, few navigational charts still acknowledge abandoned temples continue standing beneath unfamiliar constellations. Dust settles across unopened tombs on Moraband. The shattered halls of Malachor remain silent beneath the stars. Exegol's storms still circle ruined towers where the voices of the Sith Eternal have finally faded. The living Sith are gone. Their empire is gone. Yet the galaxy they shaped continues carrying the echoes of every choice they made, leaving future generations to decide whether those echoes become nothing more than history or the beginning of another age of darkness. Why do so many of the most famous Sith in Star Wars belong to stories that are no longer considered canon? That question often surprises newer fans because names such as Darth Revan, Darth Nihilus, Darth Sion, and Vitiate appear constantly in discussions of the Old Republic. The answer lies in a major decision made by Lucasfilm in 2014. From that point onward, Star Wars officially separated its storytelling into two continuities. The current canon includes the films, the live-action and animated series, and post-2014 novels, comics, and reference books. Earlier expanded universe material was reclassified under the Legends banner, preserving those stories without treating them as the official history of the modern Star Wars timeline. This distinction matters because Legends explored the ancient Sith in remarkable detail. The Knights of the Old Republic games introduced Darth Revan and Darth Malak, presenting sprawling conflicts between the Republic and vast Sith fleets. Later stories expanded that era with figures such as Darth Nihilus, whose hunger for the Force became one of the most unsettling concepts ever imagined for the dark side. Darth Sion endured impossible injuries through sheer hatred, while Emperor Vitiate ruled across centuries through powers that reached beyond ordinary Sith ambition. These characters became enormously influential among fans, yet none of their complete stories currently belong to official canon. They remain part of Star Wars history in another sense, as stories that shaped generations of readers and players even after the continuity changed. Current canon has not ignored those older creations entirely. Instead, it occasionally acknowledges them in careful, restrained ways. Reference materials have used names associated with ancient Sith traditions. The Visual Dictionary for the Rise of Skywalker identifies one of the Sith Eternal Legions as the Revan Legion, honoring the famous Legends character without confirming his complete biography. Similar references appear elsewhere, rewarding longtime fans while preserving flexibility for future storytelling. This approach reflects Lucasfilm's broader philosophy. Familiar names can return, but their histories need not remain identical. Why has modern canon left so much of the ancient Sith era unexplored when legends already provided detailed answers? One possibility is purely creative. Mystery has always been one of Star Wars' greatest strengths. When Obi-Wan Kenobi first mentioned the Clone Wars in 1977, audiences imagined decades of untold adventures long before those stories appeared on screen. Ancient Sith history now occupies a similar role. By revealing only fragments, Moraband, Malachor, Darth Bane, the Rule of Two, scattered temples, forgotten battles, canon allows the earliest ages of the galaxy to retain the feeling of distant myth rather than fully mapped history. That choice also mirrors the perspective of the characters themselves. Luke Skywalker does not possess complete records of the first Sith Empire. Rey never studies a comprehensive archive describing every Dark Lord who lived before Darth Bane. Even Emperor Palpatine, despite his immense knowledge, often speaks in fragments, legends, and carefully selected truths. The galaxy has forgotten far more than it remembers. Entire civilizations have risen and disappeared. Hyperlanes have shifted. Governments have collapsed. The missing history therefore becomes believable rather than frustrating because the characters inhabit the same uncertainty as the audience. Another fascinating consequence emerges from this silence. Modern canon repeatedly suggests that the Force itself preserves memories more faithfully than written history does. Yoda's journey to Moraband reveals truths unavailable in ordinary archives. Ezra Bridger's encounters with ancient temples expose him to echoes of events that no living witness could describe. Rey's connection with the Sith dagger and later with Exegol likewise demonstrates that certain places retain impressions of extraordinary moments. Written records can burn, libraries can collapse. The Force continues remembering. Why did the Sith ultimately fail despite succeeding more completely than any enemy the Jedi had ever faced? Looking across the entire chronology, one pattern appears again and again. They mastered patience. They mastered secrecy. They mastered manipulation on a galactic scale, yet every generation eventually returned to the same weakness. The pursuit of absolute control prevented genuine trust. Darth Bane expected apprentices to overthrow their masters. Darth Sidious intended to replace Dooku with Anakin, then later imagined replacing Vader with Luke, and eventually sought Rey herself. Every victory planted another seed of instability because the Sith could never allow equals to exist beside them. The Jedi, by contrast, often survived catastrophic defeats through cooperation rather than domination. After Order 66, Obi-Wan Kenobi preserved hope by protecting Luke Skywalker on Tatooine. Yoda withdrew to Dagobah instead of pursuing revenge. Leia Organa helped build the Rebel Alliance despite losing Alderaan in 0BBY. Luke chose compassion over hatred aboard the second Death Star. Rey ultimately accepted guidance not only from Luke and Leia, but symbolically from generations of Jedi who came before her. Canon never portrays the Jedi as flawless. It does, however, repeatedly suggest that community proves more durable than fear across long stretches of history. Many fans enjoy imagining what future Star Wars stories might reveal about the distant Sith past. Could canon someday explore the first Dark Lords in greater detail? Will Moraband once again become the setting for new adventures? Might ancient temples hidden beyond the known hyperspace routes still conceal forgotten holocrons waiting to be discovered? Those possibilities remain open. They are questions rather than answers, invitations rather than established facts. The silence surrounding the earliest Sith has become part of the storytelling itself. As our journey comes to its end, the long arc of Sith history reveals an unexpected rhythm. It begins with fallen Jedi seeking forbidden power. It grows into empires that consume themselves through ambition. It contracts into Darth Bane's rule of two, survives in perfect secrecy for 1,000 years, triumphs through Darth Sidious, collapses through Anakin Skywalker's redemption, briefly reaches again from the darkness of Exegol, and finally comes to rest without an apprentice willing to carry it forward. Every stage follows naturally from the one before it. Nothing appears suddenly. Every victory carries the shadow of its own eventual defeat. Now the crimson blade that illuminated the Forgotten Chamber slowly fades. Its steady hum softens until only silence remains among the ancient carvings etched into cold stone. Dust settles once more across symbols that have witnessed the rise and fall of Dark Lords, republics, empires, and generations of Jedi who struggled to understand them. Outside, somewhere beyond the Forgotten Temple, stars continue their quiet journeys, exactly as they did 1,000 years ago. The Sith have passed into history, yet the chamber endures, waiting in perfect stillness, holding its secrets until another traveler steps into the darkness and asks the oldest question of all: how did it all begin? If you stay with this history long enough, you begin to notice that it is not really a story about the Sith alone. It is a story about choices made one person at a time across thousands of years. The galaxy changes because a Jedi decides to seek forbidden knowledge, because an apprentice decides to challenge a master, because a senator chooses fear over trust, because a father finally chooses love over obedience. Enormous wars, colossal fleets, and planet-sized weapons fill the horizon, yet the deepest turning points almost always happen in quiet rooms, private conversations, and moments when no one else is watching. That may be the most enduring lesson hidden beneath the spectacle. The Force touches entire civilizations, but it still asks each individual the same question: what will you become when power is finally placed within your reach? The Sith spent a millennium proving that patience can be as dangerous as anger. They learned to hide when earlier generations would have attacked. They studied governments more carefully than battlefields and understood that institutions could be conquered without firing a single shot. Their greatest triumph was not the destruction of the Jedi Temple or the proclamation of the Empire. It was persuading good people to believe that surrendering a little freedom today would guarantee safety tomorrow. That pattern feels familiar because Star Wars has never treated tyranny as something that appears overnight. It grows quietly, gathering strength while ordinary people convince themselves that someone else will notice the danger first. And yet the saga never leaves you in despair, because the same history keeps revealing another pattern that is just as persistent. Every age of darkness eventually encounters someone willing to choose differently. Obi-Wan keeps watch over a lonely moisture farm on Tatooine. Leia refuses to surrender after losing her homeworld. Luke lowers his lightsaber when striking would seem easier. Rey rejects an inheritance built on fear, even when unimaginable power is offered to her. None of them erase suffering that has already happened. They simply refuse to let suffering decide who they will become next. That quiet refusal proves stronger than every empire the Sith ever built. Perhaps that is why the balance of the Force has always been more difficult to understand than victory in a war. Balance does not mean that light and darkness deserve equal celebration, nor does it suggest that cruelty somehow completes compassion. Throughout canon, balance comes when fear no longer rules every decision, when attachment no longer becomes possession, and when strength exists in service of life rather than domination. The Sith mistake control for balance because they believe peace can only exist after every uncertainty has been eliminated. The Jedi, at their best, gradually discover that peace begins when uncertainty is accepted instead of conquered. The difference between those two ideas shaped the fate of the galaxy more profoundly than any fleet ever assembled. As you leave these ancient stories behind, the names begin to stretch across time like distant constellations. Darth Bane, Darth Sidious, Darth Vader, Luke Skywalker, Leia Organa, Rey, each seems impossibly important while their own lifetime unfolds, yet each eventually becomes another voice inside a history far larger than themselves. Worlds endure after rulers fall. Temples remain after their guardians disappear. The stars above Moraband shine with the same quiet indifference as the stars above Achto, Coruscant, Endor, and Exegol. History remembers victories, but the Force seems to remember choices. And so your journey ends where it quietly began. The forgotten chamber is still there beneath ancient stone, wrapped in silence older than the Republic itself. The crimson blade has long since faded, leaving only cold air, drifting dust, and carvings whose meaning outlived every hand that etched them into the walls. Nothing moves now except the faintest whisper of time passing through empty corridors. You step back into the darkness, carrying the story with you, while the temple waits patiently for another traveler, another question, and another quiet night among the stars.